Welcome to Insight. I'm Terry Morris, and this is the second in our series of quarterly news programs for Roadway Express employees. For this edition of Insight, we'll get an update on our service to Canada. We'll see the new AGO mailroom where nearly 2 tons of mail are handled every day. Next, we'll meet with Steve Carpenter, an AGO employee who saved the life of an electrician who was working on the General Office edition. Finally, we'll take a quick look at the 11 men and women who recently received the President's Ring of Honor, the award presented to employees for their extraordinary achievements in sales. Canada has been the largest trading partner of the United States for many years. Owing to many decades of trade and friendship, goods have always flowed freely between the two countries. Approximately 80% of the Canadian exports, about $70 billion, are shipped to the U.S., while approximately 70% of the Canadian imports, about $55 billion, are shipped from the U.S. We talked with Bill McGinley, Area Sales Manager for District 15, to find out what role Roadway has in the shipping of Canadian freight.
Specifically, a scope of our operation in Canada is that we have presently 8 terminals, Montreal, Toronto, London, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, and our most recent addition is in Winnipeg. About a month ago, we also opened a substation in Hamilton, Ontario, which, as the business begins to grow in that particular community, we are going to be converting that to a terminal, hopefully sometime later this summer. Right now, it would appear that our major competition from domestic U.S. carriers is coming from Consolidated Freightways, who's been up there for a long time. They operate under the name Canadian Freightways, and from Yellow Freight. Yellow Freight purchased a carrier early last year, and when they purchased the carrier, they maintain a lot of intra-Ontario business, which we really don't handle. But they're also starting to expand into places like Fort Erie, Hamilton, and both these carriers have been very aggressive, and they've had an advantage on us from the start because our status, particularly in Ontario, was uncertain. But now we're starting to catch up, and I foresee by the end of this year that we'll be running neck and neck with them.
When selling our Canadian service, there are certain things our sales and operations people should keep in mind.
First of all, you have to understand the Canadian marketplace. Not much manufacturing other than automotive is really done in Canada, at least in Ontario. The majority of the work in Ontario is light assembly work. Raw materials are imported from the United States and then assembled in Canada. Or there's a tremendous amount of warehousing and distribution, meaning there's a Canadian company with an American affiliate. They may have 1 or 2 major inbound moves, and then their outbound freight is primarily distributed in the Greater Toronto area. Other things to keep in mind, most of the major manufacturers in Toronto, or in Canada in general, primarily in Ontario, they do not, if they have any volume at all, ship on a direct basis into the States. Most of your big accounts ship into Buffalo and exit Buffalo from there to get around the high Niagara Frontier tariff rates. You also have to be very aware of the various operations of the different terminals, where they break, how they move the freight, how they clear the freight. For instance, in Toronto and in London, we clear the freight inland. In Montreal, they clear the freight at the border. Another thing to keep in mind when selling Canada is who actually controls the business. If the freight is moving inbound from the States into Ontario, many times the freight's moving on a collect basis, and your shipper does not have the ability to control it. Consequently, you need to tailor any pricing programs towards the individual or the company that actually controls the freight.
In the last year, Roadway has done much to educate our representatives and will continue to do so with additional pamphlets and videotapes. Watch for these to be released in the near future.
Most backing accidents can be avoided. When backing, use your eyes, use your four-way flashers, use your horn, and use your feet to check around the vehicle. Watch the new videotape, Look Before You Back, and learn how to avoid backing accidents.
Deep wedge is the nickname already being used for the new high cube 48-foot and 28-foot trailers we are testing. High-capacity, smaller radius tires allow the floor of the trailer to be lower to the ground. The height is the same, 13.6. The result, the 28-footer has an extra 50 cubic feet, and the 48-footer 114 more cubic feet. These units have air springs that double as lifters to raise the floor to dock height for loading and unloading. The deep wedge has a lot of potential. Watch for future development.
This is the central location for nearly all truck mail throughout the company. Last year, approximately 15 million pieces of truck mail were handled by the Akron General Office mailroom. And that doesn't include the large volume of parcel, express, and U.S. mail that came to the General Office each day. Today we're here in the AGO mailroom with Carl Lewis, Supervisor of the Distribution Services Department. Carl, exactly how much mail goes through the mailroom in a day?
Terry, it's impossible for us to give an exact count, but we average anywhere between 4,000 to 6,000 pounds of mail processed every day.
And how many employees are needed to handle that type of volume?
Because of the volume, we use between 15 and 20 people over 7 days a week, 21 hours a day. Some of those people are on 4 10-hour day shifts. There's others on 5 8-hour shifts to cover the workload.
Is there any special equipment used to make things run more efficiently?
We still depend heavily on manual sorting of the mail through a pigeonhole technique, but we do use a postage meter to handle all the outbound U.S. mail from the AGO. We also use a PC in sending out Federal Express because we generate such a volume from the General Office.
The mailroom is also equipped with surveillance cameras used on off hours for necessary pickup and delivery, and a large dock area to manage all shipping and receiving for the building. Steve Carpenter is the shipping and receiving clerk at the AGO. He is also an emergency medical technician and chief of the Lawrence Township Volunteer Fire Department. John Moore is an electrician who was electrocuted while working on the General Office addition. The last thing he remembered before the accident was that he was trying to reconnect the power bank that supplies heaters.
Paul Heinzling, myself, John, which was the victim, and 2 other gentlemen, and one other one came in through the door when the accident happened. I don't know their names. They came in. Paul called the switchboard and told them to have the squad sent over, and then he went and got the oxygen for me. By the time he got here back here with the oxygen, the squad was just pulling up at the scene, and there was, like I say, nobody really knew what to do except myself. The 2 gentlemen that was in there with Paul thought he just passed out from like heat exhaustion or something. They wanted to prop his feet up. The other ones wanted to set him up in the setup position. The other one wanted to fan him. They didn't know what they were doing, and it could have cost him his life.
Steve's training with the fire department allowed him to identify Mr. Moore's problem quickly and react immediately.
Some of it goes back to being on the fire department. The training we have there, also you can use a lot of it for everyday use. We have CPR classes every year to refresh everybody on CPR for babies up to adults. We set up mock disasters, electrical shock victims for training with the fire department.
Steve encourages all roadway employees to learn CPR and believes anyone with basic CPR training could have saved John Moore's life.
Just being one person back there that knew what to do was kind of tough. You know, nobody else knew what to do except myself, and it really would help a lot if there was another person there, because that would have left me free to do the chest compressions and somebody else to monitor to see if he is breathing, to check carotid pulse on him, see if the heart is beating. Instead, you know, you have to do that all yourself.
For information on CPR classes in your area, contact the American Heart Association, Red Cross, or your local fire department. On February 25th and 26th, 11 employees came to Akron and were presented with the President's Ring of Honor. These individuals were selected for their superior performance in sales for 1986 and were honored at 2 award presentations, a cocktail party, and a dinner hosted by the officers of Roadway Express. The first winners of this prestigious award were Denny Brown, Tim Conrad, Corey Coombs, John Dye, Cynthia James, Bill Lewis, Bob McBroom, Pat McNaughton, Scott Shearer, Linda Strong, and Tom Wells. Well, that's it for this edition of Insight. We'd like to thank you for the positive response to our initial program. Watch for Insight each quarter. And if you have any ideas or stories you'd like to see on future programs, contact the Insight coordinator in your district office.